All college students have to think and plan carefully about finances, and despite the lower cost of tuition, that includes students at community colleges. That's why the state treasurer's office recently partnered with an ed tech company to provide students at 22 community colleges with a free course in financial literacy. To tell us about the effort is the leader of the state's partner, the founder and CEO of Money Experience, Jeet Singh. Thank you very much for being with us, Jeet.
Thank you.
Jeet, give us the context of why this is happening now. I know there are these recent news reports about community colleges around the country struggling with enrollment during the pandemic. We hear all these stories about college students in general having problems with their loans. So why this focus right now on community colleges?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think across the nation, there's been a lack of basic knowledge about money. It's not basically taught in school or college largely. And although many states have put in mandates to teach financial literacy, often it's unfunded. So schools and colleges have not been able to do it, even though they're being told to do it. They didn't have necessarily the curricula or the staff or the budgets to do so. When the state came to us wanting to tackle this, and Treasurer Goldberg has been an advocate of financial literacy since the very beginning, they weren't even sure which groups they wanted to target. But I think COVID had a very big effect on obviously all of us and education specifically. I think the financial pressures, and the fact that people making bad decisions with money became even more prevalent today. And I think that was the moment right after COVID hit. Then the state called us and said, "How about we do this in community colleges?" And that was obviously very much in fitting with what we were already doing.
I think one thing that's been shown even before the pandemic, and this is about community colleges, that a lot of the students, they fall off the track partly because of financial problems.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And the population is very broad. We think of college students as being, 18, 20 years old, but in community colleges, they may be adults in their 30s and 40s who are coming back to school, potentially after having to leave school because they, had children young at college age and had to work to make a living, and now want to improve their, career prospects. So it is a very broad range of ages and economics in community college. It's absolutely true.
I'm also trying to imagine what's in it for the state here, because community colleges, a lot of them are at least connected with the state in some way. And the state treasurer is looking at this, and I can imagine her saying, if you keep more of these students enrolled in community colleges, that helps the colleges even financially. And it also helps the state tax base for these students to stay on track.
Yeah, I suspect you're right. I mean, Treasurer Goldberg has really had programs in the Office for Economic Empowerment at all kinds of ages. They have programs for very young kids. They have programs for elderly. They have programs for mothers, new mothers, and so she's been spanning a big range, and a lot of credit. Because she's been pushing this agenda. We'd like to see it go into public high schools and of course the state college system as well. But community colleges, as you point out, the people in community colleges typically are here. They stay here in Massachusetts. They're a big part of the economy, and across a lot of industries, not necessarily the ones we read about, such as high tech or pharmaceuticals and so on. And so a very big part of the tax base is community college represents a very big population that are in Massachusetts, stay here, and so on.
Well, one of the things that you have to do with your course as you've designed it is that you want to engage the students and get them to use it without sort of intimidating them with a lot of math. How do you make that work?
That was quite difficult to achieve. We had another company doing life skills training for young people, and we found that we couldn't find any products to teach about money, how money works. And we found that most things in the market are quite boring, often fairly technical in terms of describing financial products and mortgages and interest rates and so on, which is, again, not particularly interesting for a young person. And not particularly relevant necessarily to what they were thinking about. So what we built in a nutshell is a simulator which allows you to make decisions, and it covers a whole life arc from high school to retirement and all the things that happen in between, you know, your first car, or having your apartment, or even getting married, having children, having to pay for their education later on. And so we did a couple of things. We made it about the values and priorities that the person has. It's highly personalized. And it's not just about money. It's about, like, what are you doing with it? What do you care about in life? And did your decisions match, not just financially, but, you know, if you want to spend more time with your family, that has other impacts than, oh, I just want to make as much money as I possibly can. So by making it about life priorities, I think we made it much more accessible. And it's quite a bit of fun, actually. The simulator is interesting. We also don't preach. So we're not telling people what to do. We are letting them try it out, but then the consequences are obvious, right? So you make decisions and suddenly, like, how come I can't afford that apartment? Oh, I don't have a salary to afford that apartment. Why did that happen? Oh, maybe I should have gotten that other job, but I couldn't get it unless I had a college education, and so on. So it's a way of teaching by experientially letting people go through a simulator and then realize, maybe that wasn't the best idea. But it's, of course, a safe environment. You know, you're testing it out, and it's not your real life. So that's in a nutshell how we approached it. And we found that not only was it appealing to students, but the other big problem we realized was that most teachers aren't really qualified to teach financial literacy, or they don't feel that they're qualified. And so we had to make it very easy for a facilitator, a counselor, not necessarily a teacher, to be able to lead a discussion about what choices did you make when you were in the simulator and what happened, and let's talk about that. And that's a much easier thing to do. And it's also interesting because now you lead a discussion with a class, with a group, or an individual, and say, well, why did you make those choices? And did that work out the way you thought it would, you know, or why'd you do these things? And so that has also been very useful because it doesn't put off the potential instructor either.
Well, choices can mean how much I spend on food this week. You know, do I pack a lunch, or do I go out to a restaurant? But it can also mean looking as far down as retirement planning. Why do you telescope that far?
Well, so if you look at the long-term impacts that the decisions have, one of the problems is that it's very difficult for most people, any of us, to think really long-term, right? We say, well, we want this thing now, and we have this job now, and I want to buy that car, or, you know, I want to buy those shoes. And it's difficult to express why certain decisions may have long-term impacts. And just saying that, oh, you should start saving now doesn't really work, as we know. So by compressing the sort of time frame, and you can go through this entire simulator in a few hours if you want to, and I've watched kids go through it without saying anything to them in, you know, 2 or 3 hours. Or you can break it up into units and have discussions with your instructor every week, and so on. So there's lots of ways of doing it. But the result is that you keep going through and seeing what happens next. And that's very difficult to express in other ways. You can't say it theoretically, you know, so let them do it. Like, oh my gosh, well, here's where I ended up, and I guess I can retire now, but maybe my retirement isn't so comfortable, and maybe I don't have money to pay for certain things for my kids, and so on. So it allows you to give perspective in a sort of a quick way.
What was it like for you? You said you were in some situations where you could see the reactions from the people who were using this. What were the surprising things for you?
Oh, there were lots of things that are interesting to see. Some of them are, for instance, in some environments, you have students who have no idea of all the possibilities that are out there in terms of jobs or even fields of study. They might be coming from a neighborhood where everyone does the same thing, and you know, and the concept that they might go off and study this topic, and there are jobs there, and oh my goodness, it pays that much. Who would have thought that? So that's one on one end. I think some of the funnier things have been people see the consequences, for instance, of divorce. And you know, so wait, what happened? I lost half my money. That's not a good thing, you know. Which may be something which they've experienced, you know, with their parents and not known the extent of it. So, you know, we deal with real life issues like that. There's some funny reactions sometimes when kids get to the point in the simulator where their kids are going to college and they're like, I'm not going to pay that. You're going to state school. So, I mean, there's a lot of really interesting reactions. And I think there's a surprise which happens, which is that students say like, I didn't know that's how that worked. And I think that's kind of what we intended. It's always very, nice when we see those reactions. The thing we do, by the way, is that, I mean, one way of thinking about what happens in the simulator is that you're kind of doing a future life intent survey in some ways, right? And then you're looking at the averages, the aggregates of what students are saying, and you can see patterns as to, well, most of you seem to be getting married in your 30s and having kids and whatever, and you want to live in this kind of city or this kind of rural area, and you mostly wanted to go for these kinds of jobs. And those are really interesting, I think, from the educator point of view and for the policymaker as well, to say like, well, here's what the populations seem at this age to be looking forward to in their lives. And one hopes that when things go well or don't go well, that we can learn from that to help, either adjust what we're teaching or adjust the programs to support them and so on.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Mike. We should finally mention briefly, if there's anybody who wants to get more information about what you're doing, whether they're in a community colleges or elsewhere, what's the best way for them to follow up on that?
Oh, we're at moneyexperience.com, quite simply. And I should also point out that we do have other bank sponsors that have money available for other institutions, nonprofits, high schools, and so on, particularly public high schools. So we would love people who are interested in this program to reach out to us, because in some cases, especially for public schools and so on, there is money available.
Great. Well, thank you very much for breaking the news on that as well. Jeet Singh from Money Experience. We'll have more news in just a moment.